My work in sociology in the area of complexity focuses mainly on two sorts of phenomena. The one phenomenon is opinion formation in societies. Often we see that in societies opinions suddenly change, that for example groups that had reasonable consensus with each other about important phenomena, important issues, suddenly start to diverge in their opinions. And we try to understand better how that comes about, under what conditions it comes about. We do computational modeling of these processes, but also analyze it empirically. The second area we look at is segregation, so ethnic segregation, for example. A big thing is residential segregation in cities. Ethnicities do usually not live together, do usually cluster. The same goes for schools, for example. And we try to understand the dynamics of the process that generates segregation and how we could perhaps intervene into it and reduce segregation with smart strategies. Again, we use computational modeling for this, but also try to fit our models, match our models with the available data. When I think about how we could use, in my area, complexity theory to inform policy or to inform what decision makers in the private sector could do, I would think, well, first of all, about these opinion formation dynamics. I think we see in many societies, for example, radical or extreme opinions increase lately. I think it's very important for policymakers to understand better under what conditions that happens, and for example, under what particular local situations you would see more of those extreme opinions come up, tensions between groups arise more. So to target better possible interventions to prevent that. So that would be for policymakers. As to the private sector, if I think of influencing opinion formation, I think in a big area in which currently also we see opinion dynamics sometimes become pretty extreme is the internet, online interaction. For example, online fora or opinions developing on Facebook or in tweets that people send around. And I think those companies running these systems are in principle also not really interested in those things happening. So one can look into how these systems work and why these things happen and how one could perhaps, in the way how these systems operate, try to moderate such processes. Of course, not trying to dictate people what they should think, of course not. But sometimes little interventions can help, like for example, pointing someone who has a certain opinion to other information, recommending other information to that person. That could already help to moderate that person's opinion. And what complexity thinking can help here, or can do here, I think, is help us understand where in the system the critical people are whom one would like to expose to other information, whom one would like to get a more moderate point of view. So one could perhaps translate this also into technological solutions. It's an interesting question to reflect upon whether this complexity science is actually a science that is not sufficiently appreciated, let's say both within science as well as by policymakers. Maybe to some extent this is true. If I think about my own discipline, sociology, complexity thinking has not really had a big impact on the discipline so far, which I think partially is due to a lack of data, but partially is also due to a lack of training of scientists in terms of thinking in systems. We are very much focusing on individuals. We do surveys, we try to understand or ask people questions that help us explain why people do certain things, but we do not really that much try to understand how people interact and influence each other, and how this is the reason for why they give us certain answers in surveys. So I think in sociology we can learn a lot more from taking complexity more serious. In a similar vein, I believe that in the policy area there is also let's say, not enough appreciation of the systemic character of social processes, and also policymakers could, I think, be better informed by thinking more in complexity terms.